Okay, perfect. So, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. My name is Jessica Kirschbaumer. I am the Alberta Horse Trails president and the communications chair. We are very excited to put on another webinar for you, and I'd really like to thank the HTA Alberta Horse Trails Association for sponsoring this. I would like to thank Kathleen Ziegler for organizing this, and I would like to thank Clay, sorry, April Clay for joining us once again. She's done several webinars for us, and they have all been really great, so we are excited to have her back. I'm going to let her introduce herself in one moment, but we will have a poll pop up for you guys who have the newest version of Zoom. I will launch it now, I believe. And so it'll just be one question that we'll talk about a little bit later, and you should see it pop up shortly. So I will turn it over to April to introduce herself, and she can get started.
Okay. So thanks, Jessica, and Kathleen, once again for having me. It's always a pleasure. It's turned into a nice yearly tradition. And so, well, just to introduce myself, I am, whoops, I just had a slide malfunction there. Something, oh, I see.
Is it the poll?
It's the poll that's
Oh,
popped up.
perfect.
It's sort of, I'm
In
just,
your way.
it's in
We
my way.
we can't see it, so
Okay.
you're good.
Oh, oh yeah, I can see. Okay. You can't see it?
No,
Okay. It's just, I'm not sure how to get rid of it or resize it because it's hard when you don't have that presenter view because then you're getting all of these
things. I have the same thing, don't worry. Lots of
things.
things
Oh,
around
okay.
the
Oh,
edge.
no. Why didn't it want me to do that? Okay. Okay, I'll
It's
hopefully
all
that will go away in a while.
it's all
Um,
good.
Okay, so back to the introduction. So I am April Clay, obviously. I am currently a psychologist in private practice here in Calgary, Alberta. And I am a former competitive rider. So I'm coming at this topic from several different places, I guess you could say. So one is all of the horses that I've known over my lifetime and had relationships with, and those experiences that I've had with them. And also, of course, through my work as a sports psychologist, and a psychologist, I really, of course, love working with riders the most. Um, it's nice to come full circle with this. And so then and this is a topic, this relationship rescue, actually, that I can't believe that I didn't do sooner because it, to me, is a really important part of the sport. And when people come in to see me in office, I always do a little bit of a relationship assessment. So I always want to know how long you've known your horse, what kind of relationship you think you have with them, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Um, so are you on the verge of divorce? Are you feeling great about the relationship? So I want to know all of these things because it's ultimately very important how you view the relationship, how the relationship is going to your learning and your performance goals. So, well, oops, now I can't move there we go. Okay. So I move that down to the bottom. So horse sport obviously involves many physical and psychological skills or demands. Um, any sport has like a profile of different physical and psychological skills, and you'll have, even within horse sports, you're going to have different looking profiles across different looking horse sports. However, I think probably most people here would agree, if I can get the slide to go forward, Um, there we go. That learning to communicate effectively with your equine teammate is perhaps one of the most important skills that a rider can have. And now we come to our poll, actually. And so just to have a little bit of a fun discussion at the beginning here, and I already had this image from my book. Um, And so I wanted to know that if you were on the Dr. Phil show and your horse were to spill some tea about your relationship, what would they reveal? That you don't understand them, but they like the treats, that your nervous energy makes them want to run for the hills, um, that you don't pay attention to them, or that your messages get lost in translation, or maybe something else. So, Jessica, did you want to kind of go over what we're seeing in the poll?
Definitely. So we've got it says 33%. She doesn't understand me, but I like the treats, so I stay around. Another 33%. His nervous energy makes me want to run for the hills, literally. And then we've got 11%. She never pays attention to what I want. It's always me, me, me. And then 22% say is the lost in translation.
Mhm.
And actually, oh, one person said other just now.
Okay. Okay. Anything in the chat about what other might be for some people? I'm just curious.
Yeah, if anybody would like to elaborate. And if not, that's okay too.
That's okay too. I think, obviously this is tongue in cheek, and there's all things I think that people who have been around horses can relate to, and probably communication problems that they have had at one point or another along the way. So anything else?
Nope, nothing in the chat right now.
Okay, so we'll move on. So, first of all, why exactly is the relationship important? Well, first of all, you literally can't get anything done without it, right? You're the leader, but the partnership is real. So, in other words, horses don't, you know, wake up one day and say they want to go to the Olympics or they want to perform the perfect piaffe. Those are our goals. So we're definitely the leader, but the partnership's very real. We can't get anything done without having that willingness in our partner. Um, Two, it's obviously a high risk sport. So communication often means the difference between safety and injury or worse, and that goes for both parties, right? We're talking about both human and equine there. Um, Third, aware or not, you're always sending cues, you're always communicating, and so is your horse, and you're either receiving them and being able to um, communicate back and get those goals met, or things are getting lost in translation. But that communication is constantly happening between horse and rider. And fourth, because you care about your horse's welfare. And I think most people here are involved, I would think, not 100% in the sport because they do love horses. And certainly horse welfare is becoming a bigger and bigger topic. As the years go by, we're seeing this more in the media, in the research. Some unfortunate things that have happened that have been large in the media lately. But there is also a lot of research going into equine welfare and trying to determine if our horses are indeed feeling comfortable and even happy. So horse welfare is
Uh,
obviously important.
oh,
Yeah,
April, I did get a comment in the chat
yeah.
uh, in response to the poll. Jennifer said, I do have a good relationship with my mare. She pretty well likes to do what I ask, but sometimes she says, why do I have to?
Yeah, so it's um um partially willing or sometimes. Um so let's look at strategies to boost your horse rider connection. What can we do? So the first thing I think is to show respect for your differences. And here we're talking about human versus horse, or really predator versus prey. Um, we are two very different, although we're both mammals, different biological beings. And we're talking about cross communication, uh, cross species, sorry, communication that we are trying to affect here. But these differences that we have in our biology, in our structure, um, are definitely worth knowing about. So this is not a poll, this is just a fun little quiz. So a rider's brain and a horse's brain have what in common? And we do have, by the way, a fair amount in common, including some basic brain structure. Our brain actually weighs a little bit heavier than theirs does. But what do they have in common? So both have a tendency to think negatively. My coach says nothing because my brain is turned off. Um, they both have a survival mechanism. And of course, the answer is that yes, we do both have a survival mechanism, but the horse being a prey animal, horses respond primarily with fight, flight, or freeze when they're threatened, right? Reflecting their highermost need is to survive as a prey animal. As humans, we can consciously, and I'll put in brackets here, hopefully, and we're going to talk more about this later, regulate our emotions through advanced reasoning and reflection thanks to our prefrontal cortex. So we have some different brain structures at work. But the important thing to note about our horses is that safety is your horse's most important need. And to be able to keep that front and center on your radar, because it can go a long way to understanding some of the communication difficulties that we get into. And with this comes, I think, and again, I think this is coming more into the media and the research, that if your horse is fearful, that, right, the rule is not to judge or punish. It is an indicator that they need our patience and help to learn something, right? So um, obviously they detect, and we all know this, a lot of different things about us, our energy, well, we're going to get more into that now, but like as this slide depicts, right? I mean, a horse knows when something is up with you. Um, and if it is registering fear in them, well, it doesn't matter if it's a bear or a zombie apocalypse, just better make a run for it just to be safe. Okay, so some communication basics. So, and some of these are very, of course, similar to communication rules that we have between human and human. Whenever you want to have a conversation with another human, you're going to want to first establish a connection, right? So, and in relationship with horse, it means engaging, or capturing the attention of your horse in a non-threatening way. Again, going back to safety being their highest order of the day. Um, don't underestimate your first impression and learn how your horse may be reading you. So I don't know how many people here have kind of looked at some of the in recent years, the research about looking at what horses can read about us. And some of it actually suggests that they do read facial expression, as well as I think we've always known the other things, right? The energy that we carry, the some of the body language. And but there is actually some evidence that suggests that yes, they may be reacting to your facial expressions. So interestingly, horses had more positive, so to speak, responses to people that were smiling than people that had more aggressive or um, angry looking faces. And in the case, I believe there was another study where they also paired it with some vocalizations, and that did not match the facial expression. And this apparently was concerning to horses because they wanted to kind of stay and check out the situation a little bit more so they could likely determine which way this was going. So we know that, and increasingly there's more ways that we know our horses are reading us. So that first impression that you make when you get to the barn and greet your horse is an important. And missed connections, in this case, are more likely to happen when you're not being intentional and or you're not being present. And I think uh, commonly we'll all come to realize, right, you rush into the barn and right, throw open the door a little bit too forcefully and spook your horse, or that you're carrying some anger that day and you're trying to get them from the paddock and they're just not having it. Um, that if you're not present and you're not um, communicating something that is about safety, then that can construe a misconnection. So in this sense, it can be very beneficial to develop a transition routine from your day to ensure you are ready to engage with your horse. Because let's face it, we're all coming from jobs and school or other things that might have us in our heads, so to speak, and so distracted or consumed ruminating. And that means essentially that we're not ready to have and open to having the best kind of conversation that we can with our horse. Um, so there's several ways you could think about doing this. One way is to develop a kind of a routine again before you enter the barn that you are going to in some way put away the stress of the day, that you're going to run a quick check on your system to see what's going on, and acknowledge that you are clearing that now to be present for your horse. Another great way is to practice mindful grooming, and this is one of the things I talk about in the uh, mindful riding online course is being mindful when you're grooming and spending some extra time in grooming with your horse and using different types of brushes, using different types of pressure, observing your horse. And in this way, you can, just as you would spend some extra time connecting with a person, let's say, you would start to get to know where your horse is at that day. And that could be, again, really valuable information before you climb into the saddle. We also, in communicating with other humans, and especially between human and horse, we need to create a language. Obviously, they cannot sign up for any, right, English speaking courses at the local community college. So it's our responsibility to create a language and with them. And that, of course, is like through things like pressure and absence of pressure and using various riding aids in order to communicate, among other things. Because again, we're always doing that. And I don't know if anyone can relate to this little thing I put up, but you know, basically we are, there's a lot of times that we might be like, wow, this is no problem. This is, it's just a little jump. And horse is like, well, yeah, what, that thing, I can't even see on the other side, right? Like I'm not sure of what we're doing. Um, and yeah, rider's like, totally, we have done this before. Come on, trust me. And horse is like, we aren't even that straight. Or why are you pulling on my face? I think you could be trying to end me. Like, I don't know what's going on here. So example of misconnection. But if rider receives that connection or that feedback from the horse, right? Of course, it's not going to be through our language, but does pick up on that, then might respond with sorry, sorry, in the form of straightening out, lightening that pressure on the reins and correcting that so that the horse is brought back into some confidence about what they're doing. And yeah, looks familiar again. We're good with this. Um, so yes, being aware that that communication is always happening, being clear about what you want. And I know that's easier said than done. And we're going to talk about more mixed messages in a moment. Um, and here to upping your horse knowledge, because I think it is your responsibility. In other words, there are a lot of great books out there, great videos, research that, right, you can access that will help you understand your horse's world so that you can communicate more responsibly. And I really believe that that's worth doing. Okay, so lost in translation. Um, Remember that you need to be connected and present in order to be able to hear. Because again, one way that we miss things is being occupied in our heads with thoughts, with other tasks, what we want for dinner, what's going on next week, and we're not really present with our horses. And they can obviously, depending on the degree to which that is, they can sense that. And so what that might mean for them is, you know what, I need to pay attention to that a little bit more than I need to pay attention to whatever else it is that you are asking me to do, because again, that might impact my safety. So I think I have to keep an eye on that. So that might result in a distracted horse. Your whole body obviously is your communication system, and it's again your responsibility to know what your body is saying and is it communicating the message that you want to get across. So addressing communication barriers. This poor girl has probably been a meme for I don't know how many years, and here I am adding to that. But that's okay because I think we have all had this face on in the past. But suffice to say that many lost messages arise from dysregulated riders. And let's take a look at what dysregulation and regulation mean in terms of our states. So, a regulated state is largely on the parasympathetic or rest and digest side of our nervous system. We feel more balanced in this place, calm, able to process our emotions, to name them. Um, we're more likely to have a stable heart rate, even breathing, and no excess muscle tension. Um, we're more able to think clearly, to focus, to problem solve, and of course, to communicate. And that goes for human to human and human to equine. And of course, this state is the one that facilitates learning and performance. The dysregulated state, on the other hand, feels like your nervous system is in overdrive. And that is the sympathetic or fight or flight activity dominance that you're experiencing that's acting as a lot of static sometimes in terms of your an interference in terms of your communication with your horse. So in this state, you might feel overwhelmed by strong emotions. You might have a rapid heart rate, shallow breathing, and have high muscle tension. Of course, something that could interfere with your horse communication. Um, you might also engage in impulsive or avoidant actions. So again, things that aren't thought through with your good old prefrontal cortex, which you do have. When we are in the full grip of fight or flight, we're really no different than a horse in the sense that that um, the threat, whatever it is that we're registering, will take dominance, and our brains will, and our system will react in a way to try and mitigate that threat. And that is going to be the most important thing. But what that means for us is a lot of different things, of course, when we're trying to ride a horse, right? You're going to struggle with problem solving. You might not be able to access some of the knowledge and skills that you usually have. You're likely to have heightened reactivity and impaired judgment, of course, and this can mean safety issues. Is that where that comes in for both? Um, and not surprisingly, it's associated with poor learning and performance. So both horses and humans, there is strong research to support that in this state of fight or flight, when we are where we are responding to a threat that, or we think we are, um, that obviously that's going to impair our ability to learn. Because again, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing that your brain is telling you in that moment is what's the threat and how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to get out of here? So both horses and riders would be giving thumbs up to the regulated state and a thumbs down usually to the dysregulated state. And it's, I think, pretty self-explanatory how a dysregulated state can cause a lot of different um, kinds of miscommunication between horse and rider. So in in starting to address our own dysregulation, one thing that we have to do is to know ourselves. So, and we need to know ourselves under stress, which can't be is not always the easiest thing to do. We usually do need help with this because when we are under stress, it's really hard to be observing of ourselves, right? Because again, we're locked in that must respond to the threat loop. And so it might be things that you find your stablemates, your coach, etc., are feeding back to you, like, oh, you seem to be triggered when this happens or when that happens. Um, the physiological changes you are going to probably know the best because they feel the most uncomfortable. So if you are someone who does experience, for example, a lot of muscle tension, or a rapid heartbeat, feelings of panic, um, or even some nausea, you're probably going to notice those changes about yourself in a state of dysregulation. And the other one, and this is the one that your horse might likely feel the most, are what are your behavior changes when you're under stress? And uh, in the, whoops, in the other online, one of the other online courses I have on performing under pressure, I go into this in a little bit more detail, but I do talk about how. So over time, what I've noticed from working with like now thousands and thousands of different horse rider combinations, lots of different riders, that um, we all respond in different ways to threat. And sometimes you will have kind of a default response. And that this, so say, for example, your default response is to become, to get into the fight part of the fight or flight. Then what that can look like in your riding behavior is being reactive, is possibly micromanaging your horse, is creating unnecessarily conflict with your horse, so arguing with your horse, um, lacking patience, overriding, excessive tension in your arms and legs, um, stiff or unyielding posture because of that excess muscle tension, forcing your aids, and or kind of bullying your horse, like going to that, back to that, I'm going to force this to happen. Um, and of course, again, when we're in fight or flight, we're not always making the decisions that we would make were we in a more regulated state and we could see the array of options. Um, so it might not be something that, for example, you do at home when you're training at all. This might be these kinds of different changes in your riding behavior might only come when you're under pressure or if you're dealing with some sort of trauma from a fall, trying to work through some physical fear, then you might see these, right? The flight response, so a rider that sometimes goes more towards the flight side of thing, I notice they want to rush a lot. They want to get it over with. These are the riders that will say to me, I just wanted to get out of the ring as soon as possible, and I can't tell you anything that happened in there. I don't remember it. Um, so they want to flee the situation. And they might avoid their own feelings. They might avoid other people when they're in this state. Their rapid thinking might cause, and their tendency to start to go internal might exacerbate that confusion and again resulting in more confusion and application of their aids. They might underride. So considerable disconnect from their horse sometimes, and inconsistency of contact. A rider who's stuck more so in freeze, more likely to have a passive posture or to be tilting forward in some cases, to lack energy, to be ineffective in their aid application, or really no aid application. So this might be the rider that starts to kind of drop their leg off their horse, right? Becomes unresponsive and may stop riding altogether, in a sense. Horse might physically stop. Sometimes you see this, and you can tell that the horse has become confused as to what the rider's doing. So, well, I'm really not getting in any information now, so I'm going to stop. Um, And actually, I'll just pause here a minute, Jessica, and just ask if this resonates with anyone. Do they see themselves in any of these different fight, flight, or freeze behaviors as some of their default behaviors? Or that does anyone want to comment or ask a question?
If anyone wants to comment or ask a question, it's interesting. So, a little off topic, but Kathleen and I and some Alberta Horse Trail members were down in the States and we did the eventing coaching symposium. And they had a psychologist speak down there. And a lot of this is a lot of what she was saying, which is it's just like clicking more now that I've heard it from like a second place with these three things. And it's not like people are not necessarily bad people. They're just reacting by what their response is, depending
Yeah.
on what they have experienced in the past or what they're dealing with. So this is very, very interesting. We do have a couple of comments. Um, Heidi says, yes, totally, I freeze. And another one, definitely fight, almost leading to freeze. And another comment, I definitely fall back on a fight tendency. It's neat to think back to students that I've taught which category they would fall into.
Right. Yeah. So, and sometimes, obviously, you can have more than one, like the person that said going from fight to freeze, for example, and that is a common thing. Often we get caught up in right the fight or flight, and we expend a lot of energy trying to fix a problem in that state, and that can lead us going sort of down in our energy, and almost entering a state of "Oh, I don't know what else to do anymore. So I'm going to freeze. I'm going to, right? And it's sort of a natural progression that can happen. So yeah, pretty common. Um, so just pausing here for another reminder about your horse wants and needs to feel safe. And like you're saying, Jessica, and I completely believe this, it's not that um, riders are right trying to be unfair to their horses or um, this is something they always do. We definitely have a different response when we're under threat. And I do find that some of the subtle changes in your own riding behavior, they can be hard for you to notice. And that's where other people can come in and be helpful because yeah, often again, we are so preoccupied with our own safety, whatever that means for us, that we might be aware of our heart pounding horribly, but we're not really aware that, we've picked up that much more tension in our arms and that the pressure on our horse's mouth is that much more and might be mistakenly, right, starting to blame the horse, like, why isn't my horse going forward? So it doesn't have to be a huge difference in horse terms to make a difference. So how do we combat these kinds of states, these dysregulated states that can lead us into trouble in a myriad of different ways? Well, there's something called learning self-regulation. So that's really is learning how to regulate, manage your emotional, physiological response. Um, it's a learned skill. It does take time, but it's absolutely possible. Um, it is very individual. You have to learn what works for you. And that's because no two nervous systems are alike. No two people have had exactly the same kind of experiences. And this goes for horses as well and their nervous systems, right? Um, Especially if you have a horse you got from somewhere else, they're going to have baggage from that. They have experiences that you might not know about or that you do know about that influence their nervous system. So, but us, we are definitely all very different in terms of what comes to constitute a threat for us and what can push us into states of dysregulation. And that's why it's so important to really understand, well, what are those triggers? Like I said earlier, what do you know? What information can you start to gather about what really twigs your system to start to move into that sympathetic state? Um, and self-regulation, of course, is what it says. It is you learning to regulate you, to regulate your own state. And this practice is definitely best started independent of your horse. So you learning about you before you start to really apply what you're learning to the relationship. And there are, of course, who has ever dabbled into self-regulation. There are many, many different ways to bring yourself back into a more balanced state, to start to tip the scales more in the direction of the parasympathetic or rest digest system. Um, and one is one that we actually just talked about, the knowing your knowing the behaviors, those default riding behaviors that you get into. So whether you're fight, fight, freeze, or a combination of that. So what do you tend to do, right? Do you tend to override? Do you tend to grab on with your leg? What starts to happen to you in a behavioral sense that your horse is then experiencing when you become dysregulated? And when you know that, then you can actually start to develop what I call counter behaviors. So again, if you let's say that oh yeah, one of my defaults is definitely to grab on to my horse's mouth with that much more pressure when I'm under stress. And yeah, I get under stress at horse shows. That's one of the main places I can start to get dysregulated. Um, then an example of perhaps some counter behaviors with that might be to spend some time in your warm up, um, doing some progressive relaxation, bringing some awareness to your shoulders and your arm, like the place that you usually start to carry that tension, and to deliberately look at doing some softening and engaging in those counter behaviors to bring yourself back to actually how you would be riding if you were in a regulated state, like how you would know to ride. And sometimes engaging in those behaviors, and if you have, by the way, again, this is something that you have to decide and start to figure out and make a plan for and start experimenting with, because you can't apply or know what a counter, right, behavior is when you're in the middle of stress. It's just not going to happen. But if you get to know yourself under stress and know, oh yeah, this is what I do, then you can start to have a plan to apply some of these different behaviors when the stress starts to sorry, and that can be a way to start to bring yourself back into regulation. Um, Something as small as slowing down physically, taking a deliberate pause. So, whether you're off your horse and you're rushing around the barn aisle, or you are on your horse and you feel like your brain, is on speed and everything seems to be going by really super quickly, is is to really slow yourself down physically, to talk slower, to, if you're on foot, to walk a little slower, to walk with a relaxed rein if you can do that. So just taking a deliberate pause um, can be a small thing that can help. Setting a small goal that you can control. So one of the things that happens, a lot with fight or flight is that our thinking starts scanning, 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 scanning. What's the potential threat? What am I going to do about it? Back to the threat, back and forth. Um, and so refocusing yourself with okay, in my warm up, or something to that effect. Okay, this is the kind of canter I want to create. So I'm going to focus on that goal. Or I'm just going to focus on doing, getting a small bend in a 20-meter circle, and I can control that. I know what aids I can apply. So you start to reduce your focus down to a smaller set of variables, but also something that you can actually control. And that's very calming. It's very calming because one thing that fear, the threat system does to us is it almost has us kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. So you're scanning and waiting and looking and anticipating, right? And trying to be like, well, I got to be ready for this. Whereas when you start to set, cue yourself into a small goal, first of all, you're bringing your prefrontal cortex back online slowly, but you're also starting to, instead of the waiting, you're taking control. So you're saying, this is what I'm going to do. And that has a nice way of starting to, um, again, shift your system, your nervous system back into um, a more balanced state. You can talk to someone, and this sometimes talking to someone is a form of co-regulation, because if you talk to someone, let's say your coach is a really has a nervous system that is usually calm and balanced, and the way they talk to you and the rate at which and the tone with what they talk to you just has a soothing impact on your nervous system, then that's going to help. So that co-regulation. Um, Talking to someone can also help, and you can talk to your horse too, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. Um, that can help by way of bringing your focus back outside of yourself and onto something in your environment, right? So whether it's a person or whether it's your horse, um, bringing your focus back outside can be calming. You can do something to orient yourself to the present. So the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing is the taking a trip through your five senses. You don't have to do all five. Um, Usually, the more you do an exercise like this and you practice bringing yourself back to the present, you start to, again, start to notice like what your stronger senses are. So, for example, like for me in any situation, I would say it's the kinesthetic, it's feel. So if I can, right, feel the chair, or in the case of you, feeling your horse, or um, so you start to get to know what is your a sense that helps bring you back to the present. Use a breathing technique, and there's a whole smack of them out there. There's a lot to choose from, and they're good to experiment with. One that I constantly go back to with clients, and sometimes I refer to it as the emergency breath, is to take a deep breath in, and then on the exhale, you really extend the length of the exhale as much as you can, getting all the breath out, doing that a couple of times. So taking a deep breath in, but almost trying to double the length of your exhale, because it's on the exhale that your heart starts to slow. And that is, again, can be a helpful thing to shift you into some of that parasympathetic nervous system energy, giving your system that it's like giving your system a cue. You know what? Heart slowing down. Things are not so bad here. It's not so big of a threat. We can handle it, and you start to come into better regulation. Okay, so co-regulation is the process by which two beings, and that could be human and or horse human, um, influence and support each other's state. One being provides a calming or stabilizing presence that helps the other regulate their nervous system. So, like in the example I was just giving, so talking to someone who seems to have a calming impact on your nervous system, that would be using that person to as a stabilizing force, as a co-regulator for you. Um, with kids, that's one of the jobs that parents have, is being a co-regulator for babies, for children, and hopefully something that they help assist with learning and eventually turns into self-regulation. Now, in cases of trauma, sometimes that doesn't always happen, and those skills are missed. But that doesn't mean that they can't be developed. Um, Co-regulation, I guess we usually see this in the direction of rider being the co-regulator for the horse. Certainly, there are examples of the other way around, in the sense that if you have, let's say, a very experienced horse paired with a younger rider, that horse, knowing its job, being of a calm disposition, most likely, can help that young rider co-regulate, right? Can bring some sense of safety to the rider. But usually it's us that needs to do that. So I had AI do this picture. I'm sure you can tell it's a bit crazy, but really, this is another way that horse and rider are communicating all the time. We're communicating nervous system to nervous system, and we also, sorry, do this with people. And there are people and there are horses that are definitely easier nervous system matches for us, for our nervous system, and ones that will be harder. And I'm sure you can relate this to horses, and probably some of the people that you know, even in your life, that there might be some people that you get around and you start to feel yourself amping up. So your nervous system has starts to go into a sympathetic response for whatever reason, being around that person or around that horse. But something to keep in mind here with both horse and rider is that every horse and every rider has a really unique nervous system that is shaped over time by their experiences. So a rider who has had, let's say, a number of bad falls or a traumatic fall is likely going to have, at least temporarily, some nervous system shaping that happens from that. Now, that doesn't mean that that can't be reshaped um, and healed. And same goes for horse, because probably some of you have had horses that have perhaps, or other animals, dogs, rescue dogs. Thinking of right now, a friend of mine who has a rescue dog that definitely has a lot of anxiety that came from that experience, and his nervous system is very different. For that reason, he's come a long way. Um, but his nervous system was shaped by that. And so both human and equine, we have different experiences and things that will shape our nervous systems along the way, and that's good to be aware of. And that's why, too, when you get a new horse, um, it's always a little bit harder, and you usually have a bit more stress yourself because you don't know them as well. You don't have that bond, you don't have that knowledge going yet. So, influencing the nervous system of your horse. First rule is that kind of thing of putting on your oxygen mask first. You have a responsibility to try and regulate yourself first. Because obviously this is going to help you. If you can pull yourself into a more regulated state, you're going to have way more access to your thinking brain, to your prefrontal cortex, to your riding skills overall. So putting on that oxygen mask first can help you be a co-regulator for your horse. Um, Getting curious about the feedback that your horse is giving you, and making a plan to respond. So here again, it's like a horse that is in some way being fearful, disruptive, not acting as they usually might act in a situation. Um, Instead of automatically saying, well, this is misbehavior, we need to get curious about why this feedback is coming back to us, because sometimes we can assist in those situations about having a horse come back into regulation. So easiest example I can think of is you're riding along, everything's copacetic, and then all of a sudden, right, something moves and your horse notices it in the corner of the arena or something, and they spook or do whatever. And um, so they have had, right, a response that very familiar to them, like there might be something that I have to pay attention to there because I'm wired to survive. And if you can keep your regulation and you can ride through that spook, so to speak, as what's said, and apply consistency in your aids and be predictable yourself, then you're going to be more likely to bring your horse back into regulation faster. If you react, then you might create, and this is what's called contagion, right, with a horse. So your stress might interact with theirs, and then yeah, you might have quite a mess that you have to figure out. And that's why sometimes it is challenging to figure out what's going on. Uh, and also here, consider how you know them and how their need for safety has been met, or how you've noticed it's been met. So that might be something like bringing a horse out of a chaotic environment or a noisy environment, because you have noticed that in the past, if you can reduce the overstimulation, they will start to settle, and you can work with them from there, right? You can provide that workaround back into the regulation. It reminds me of actually a horse that I had at one point that was extremely fearful of trailering. And at one point, I would ride with him in the back of the commercial van, and it was a scary thing to watch. Uh, a horse having a panic attack, and his body language of his feet completely splayed, as far apart as you could get them, and his head up, and his eyes kind of rolling back. And so I, I didn't know what this was at the time, but I would tap him and touch him in various places to try and help him get his focus back on me and back into regulation. Interestingly, what we eventually figured out with this horse, and this is the benefit of being curious and open-minded, is that what was distressing him was being constrained. So uh, the cross ties in the trailer. And so thereafter we figured that out. He actually rode in the back of a two-horse trailer with the partition down and not tied up, and he was completely fine. So he was not stressed. And so just an example of how we, if we can get curious about your horse's response, sometimes you can get right to those ways of helping them regulate. Um, Using your frontal cortex and focusing on a simple task. So this gets back to the idea of picking a goal that you can control, picking a task that you can control. That's really simple because yes, it's helping you regulate, obviously, getting your frontal cortex back online. But what that does to your riding behavior, um, usually is it starts to better organize your intention and the consistency of your aids, something that your horse starts to recognize and that they can calm down or to regulate from that point. So part of what I do, like with riders, when I work with them individually, is that we do kind of try to create a map of, what's known about, right, human equine nervous systems, triggers, responses, all of this stuff, and try out different strategies that might help with regulation. And that is one that I have found has been really good for both on the horse and rider side. So know your horse, accept your horse, and what this means to be about, knowing your horse, accepting your horse, is that you might have a horse that is experiencing or is an anxious type of horse, for example. And what I go to now is the thought of the dog that I have right now, who is wired for anxiety. And what I found in a kind of helping him was the moment I accepted that he was anxious, and I was able to move into, well, what ways can I help him regulate? And now I have a number of different ways. So just for example, when we go to the vet, which is one of his not favorite things, I will do a leave it, take it, and I'll repeat that with a treat in my closed fist until, of course, he starts to slow down, back up his nose, and really starts to wait for that treat and slow down in taking it. And I've found something as simple as that helps him start to regulate. So I think sometimes accepting who your horse is just like accepting another person for who they is. It actually opens more doors to communicate with them. And here with horses, important to, like with people, it's listening. With horses, the listening is a lot through observation. So observe on the ground and off. Right? Make that a regular practice. Bring curiosity to that. Be aware of your own lens. Try to be aware of that. It's tough, right? We all do this anthropomorphize, big complicated word that basically says that we are giving human traits, right, to animals, to horses, for example. And so and thinking that they are like us, and they're not. They come from a very different place. And this is where I think it's our responsibility to learn as much as we can about how they operate, what their world is like. That's going to give us um, the biggest chance of communicating with them effectively. And to experiment with their language preferences. And what I mean by this is that an experience I had early on riding with a mare who I was definitely caught up in my teenage competitive mind of this horse is driving me crazy. It's head is up too much. We're never going to be competitive. It's making me angry. And I would get into fights with her until I realized that I was just getting absolutely nowhere. And of course, her head was going even higher. And so one day I just dropped the reins and she started to relax. And then for whatever reason, I started to get curious and I started to experiment with like different levels of pressure in terms of taking up the reins. And what I learned about her that day was that she could not tolerate very much pressure. Um, and that the more I worked with her preferences, the more I got out of her. And we did end up being competitive happily. So remember that you need to complete this feedback loop because communication, again, human equine, it involves a loop. And so us as the sender, you're encoding your message to your horse, obviously in a language that they understand, pressure, absence of pressure, etc. You're trying to deliver a certain message, which is, move over, jump this jump, whatever it is. They're trying to decode it on their end. They receive it, they might understand it. They might not understand it because of some noise that could be dysregulation, for example. And but they're going to give you some feedback. And so it's our responsibility to try and decode that feedback to see what it means so that we can be more effective in communicating with our horses. Um, and something that I always like to say about horse sport is that really every ride is a conversation. So every time you get on, you are engaging in a conversation with your horse. And that, and this saying, ride the horse you have today. And by that, I don't mean, oh, this is the horse I have today, so I'm going to ride it. What I mean by that is that your horse and you will be different every day. So this is about being present to the horse that you have today and riding that horse and knowing that the communication is going to be a little bit different, right? Every day, and to be open to that. So putting it all together, the key takeaways to know your horse, to integrate observing your horse into your daily routine in some way, to know yourself, to observing yourself, how your messages are getting translated or not getting translated. Be to clear yourself of the day's concerns and be clear for your horse. So having some type um, of routine, of some way of clearing that helps you be in a position to better communicate and to know that, like I said, every ride is a conversation and you're the one that has the responsibility to guide it. And I have a coupon that I'm gonna send you guys that for the two courses that I think would help the most in improving the relationship with your horse. And I'll send that to Jessica so that you can have that in your email. But now's the time for any questions, should we have them.
Amazing. Thank you, April. And thank you for the code. If you want to send that to me, I can definitely send it out to everybody when I send out the recording to everybody who is registered. We do have a couple of comments in the chat. When you were talking about regulation, there was a comment that singing quietly with my horse helped me calm down, and it kind of feels like I'm talking to my horse.
Yeah, nice.
And then we had another question. Please explain the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or taking a trip through your senses is a grounding technique that's it's a pretty common one. So essentially we have five senses. So it would be five things that you can see in your current environment, four things that you can feel or touch, three things that you can hear, and two things that you can smell, and one thing that you can taste. And taste might be something like, what is the taste in my mouth right now? Or, if you're off horse, taking a sip of water and being aware of that. So connecting to your environment through your senses can be a way to calm yourself.
Thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to put them in the comments, or if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to ask. Ask away.
Just go away and unmute.
Oh, another comment. Susan says, thank you. And she said, also, I'm a heavy negative overthinker and very self-critical. Any suggestions?
So I take it that it starts to bring you into dysregulation and disconnection um, with your horse. So there's no one simple strategy that's going to work with that. I think again, it's about experimenting with different ways of self-regulation. And some of those are, I didn't get into, obviously there are some cognitive ways of doing that. Um, so experimenting with different ways to see what has an impact on you, because that's also the biggest thing I've learned from like working in trauma and also in sport, that one person's reason for, let's say, being self-critical or being an overthinker, um, very different from another's. And so the strategy that might work is going to vary wildly. So some of this takes getting to know your triggers and also a certain degree of experimentation, if that makes sense. Um, and I guess I would ask the question back first is, have you tried anything? Is there anything that you tried? Because that's always one of my questions. And that person can unmute if they like. And if they
Says she
want
needs to shut up,
to. Okay, that's okay.
or she's shutting up. LOL.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Oh, hi.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi,
hi.
Susan.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Well, this has been wonderful. I really enjoy this. It's been very enlightening. Thank you very much for this.
great.
So,
So
yeah.
are there, yeah, I guess, if I was working with you individually, one of the questions I would obviously ask is, what have you tried to date and what has been uh, the impact?
Oh, I have to overhaul everything actually. Go right back to scratch. So I'm just, this is the year I'm just trying to be more mindful and just empty myself and be with my horse in a very calm place. So try to let it go. It's,
Yeah, and mindfulness and that is one of the courses I gave you guys with 50%
mhm.
off, because and the reason I developed that one is I thought it was really important to the relationship that we have with our horses. But mindfulness, as you were saying, like emptying your mind. And it's not that your mind needs to be completely empty per se, but what mindfulness is about being in the moment, being present, and practicing that with your horse. So that instead of forcing, for example, um, trying to force your thoughts to be positive, which is what some people might do in this situation. Oh, I got to be more positive. And um, it might lead you to start wrestling with your thoughts even more. So instead of that, um, being able to shift more into a present orientation and with your horse and practicing that um, is a very different approach to calming, right? Some of that self-critical
Mhm.
overthinking, because that is definitely, the self-criticalness and the overthinking, or that, the negative thinking is a feature of on the sympathetic fight or flight end of things. Right? So the regulation and using mindfulness to start to help us, and starting just really small, like with bringing yourself back to the present, sorry, and like in the course I talk about a lot of different ways you can link into the present with your horse. And it might just be starting on focusing on what what do his hind legs feel like
Yeah.
tracking forward.
Hmm.
And that's what you're staying present with. And I really do believe that that's a regulator. Like our presence is very much a regulator for horses and for all animals, right? When
Right.
um, they know that we're tuned in.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but thank you. That's a good insight, and I'll try to keep that in mind while
Okay.
I'm riding. On the ground is one thing, but when I'm riding, I get over.
Right. Yeah.
Try
And
not
that's why I say start small.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you. That's great. Thanks, Edwin.
Perfect. Thank you, Susan. We have another question in the chat. Jessica asks, how long would you say it takes for a horse and rider to connect fully?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of variables that go into that because there's rider experience, of course, is one thing. So, if obviously if you're a trainer yourself, then you probably have experience with a lot of different kinds of horses, and you probably have a lot of intuitive knowledge about some differences, right, in horses that you could pick up to more readily than someone without that much experience, right, with different kinds of horses. Like I know it just popped into my head. I remember interviewing Ian Miller many, many years ago, and I still remember how he talked about, there are people um, that can walk into a room and work it, and they can talk to anyone. And there are riders like that as well that can, right, walk in and connect. And then there are other people and other riders that have more restrictions on that. So experience is one variable, I think, and that goes for both horse and rider, right? Because sometimes, like I said, you have a horse, you might get a new horse, and you might not know about all of their experiences. You might have to um, figure that out as you go along. So that is going to take some time. You might not understand some of where some of their behaviors are coming from. So there's a lot of variables there, but I think that, the stress of a new combination is something to take into account and give yourself grace with. That's going to help you regulate and form bonds faster. And that's why I think too that like the stuff that sometimes, we don't emphasize enough or do enough, like the, groundwork or just like sitting observing our horses in paddocks and in different kinds of environments can be so valuable to um, increasing that bond and have that happen quicker. So sorry, I don't have a, a quick answer for that one, but lots of variables.
Excellent. Um, Lots of thank yous in the chat. Um, oh, a comment from Dana. She really loves the slide with the comment/question. How does your horse experience you? It's another great way to work on and view your own awareness. And oh, a question from Heidi. Like any relationship, how do you address becoming stale to one another? How do you refresh the relationship?
Yeah. Um, so I think that can go, it can be entered into again with a mindfulness practice. So one of the tips I posted recently on my Facebook page was about like a mindful grooming tip, and that is to, if you've been using the same order of brushes, the same way approaching your horse in terms of grooming and trying to be mindful about it for a long time, well, so that may be becoming stale, and it may be drawing you more into a mindless state, so to speak. So changing up the order of your brushes, um, adding more touch in. So changing the order of things can help bring us back into presence, if that makes sense. Um, and you can also, so I guess, obviously horses, again, this is balancing up that kind of like their need for safety and consistency, because we know that they like that. They like some predictability in us, but we can also experiment in like little ways to bring some novelty into the relationship, you know, um, like some, right? It seems like increasingly, for example, toys, horse toys are one different thing to bring into the relationship, um, to observe with your horse, or doing different, just like different things, like taking a different kind of, let's say, clinic, like in a different discipline altogether. Um, might be a way to of, yeah. Um, just like you said, refreshing the relationship.
Expand the horizons a little bit.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, we'll give everybody else another minute or two if you want to pop on or put a question in the chat. I just want to say quickly, we did record this, or we are recording this, and we will be uploading it to our HTA YouTube. And everybody who has registered will get an email with the link to rewatch it. So if you want to rewatch it, or you only were here for part of it, or if you knew have a friend or somebody who wanted to make it but couldn't, please let them know that it will be available for rewatch. And then also I'll quickly mention we have another webinar coming up next Thursday, so February 6th. We have Catherine Wilson, who's going to do a talk on the legal side of the horse world. She's a equestrian lawyer, and she's gonna talk about all sorts of things about selling horses, buying horses, PPEs, waivers, and all the sort of things you need to know to keep yourself safe. And yeah, any other questions or anything before we go?
Like we're good.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. A few more thanks to April in the comments. Excellent. So I guess we're good to wrap it up. Thank you again, April, for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. It's very much appreciated. And thank you for the Alberta Horse Trials Association for sponsoring this. And thank you to Kathleen for putting this all together and organizing. And yeah,
Yes.
awesome.
Thank you
Thank you,
for
April,
having me.
again.
Yeah.
And
Um,
we'll be
yeah.
sending out an email with April's generous offer for her 50% off the courses. Would you like to say anything to wrap it up, April?
Just yeah, thanks again for having me. It's always fun. It's always a good group, and yeah, look forward to next year.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your night, and we will see you next week in the next webinar. Right. Bye-bye.